Hello, my name's Duncan and welcome to one of my hot takes. This hot take is about the law of the minimum lever arm, a rule of thumb that's essentially easy to dismiss. Briefly, I need to explain the concept. Apologies if you're familiar with this theory. This idea was published in the early 1990s by Klaus Matic in his book The Body Language of Trees. The main argument is that if a tree's leading stem snaps, regrowth is best configured to minimize the lever arm on the stem of the tree. This would lead to less gravitational loading on the stem, if you look at configuration A in this diagram, when compared with a horizontal lateral branch extending outwards, where there would clearly be more mechanical leverage on the stem due to gravity. However, one only needs to take a step back and think independently to see that this concept is flawed in several ways. Let's start with the fact that this has not been scientifically proven. Indeed, the opposite. Scientists in France, experiments led by Bruno Mullier, have found that when young plants experience stem snapping or have to realign their main stem because they've fallen over, different species produce different angles and different forms of regrowth. They do not all mirror the same formula. So this is just a theory and it doesn't match up with empirical evidence. Further to that consideration, we also need to consider the two configurations from mechanical loading point of view, A and B. So in A, is the regrowing limb in A not sticking itself up higher into the air than in configuration B? Yeah, it is. It's heading upwards, isn't it? In which case, it will be receiving greater wind loading in a typical scenario, and thus, although this form may lower static loading on the shattered stem, it's likely to increase dynamic loading because it's increasing in height. Additionally, the regrown limb exhibits a dog leg, a double curve that makes it look like an S shape. These are typically more likely to break under loading than a straight limb unless there's been substantial reinforcement in the form of reaction wood and denser wood formed along that S curve. So there may be a stage where the dog-legged form of this limb, as it's growing up in compensation in configuration A, where it is at greater risk of failure from wind loading than the branch in configuration B. And then further, think about configuration B. This is potentially a pre-existing limb on what has now become a shattered stem or a snag. Clearly this branch was strong enough to persist during the storm that ripped the tree apart. Why then, after that, is it now considered to be a poor configuration? Remembering that only one limb has been used to simplify this illustration, of course there could be multiple lower limbs left when the stem snaps. There's no particular reason to downgrade this branch to being at greater risk to fail until such time that the stem decays substantially after its failure. But then that's the same for the upright limb in configuration A, isn't it? As with the limb in configuration B. On the last slide of this hot take, I have a few images of trees that have not grown back in the way prescribed by Klaus Matic. In fact, as I have a large library of images of such shattered trees, I can confirm that configuration A is a rare event. Trees have more options than just this one means of regrowth. So on this slide are 3 trees in that exact situation and scenario. Their main stems have snapped and none of them have followed this law of the minimum lever arm. They're breaking the law. In A, the image A, it shows a mature beech tree, Fagus sylvatica, that's lost all of its upper crown quite some time ago, but the lower branches, they've just persisted in the form that they were before. They've not really tried to establish a new leader, and in the parkland situation like that, is that really a problem? It's not a problem for the tree because it's open grown, doesn't need to go up to continue to compete with other adjacent trees. And essentially, you've now got a stag-headed tree. Image B shows a lime tree, Tiliacrus europea, that has regrown several ascending limbs after its stem has snapped. This has reformed a crown for this tree, but none of the limbs have positioned themselves in the centre of the crown to minimise gravitational leverage. I would add from experience that this form of regrowth is very common in a wide range of tree species. When they get snapped, you get multiple regrowths that ascend, but at an angle, and they don't do this dog-legged shape to head towards the middle. And then image C shows a sycamore, Acer pseudoplatanus, that's only retained a couple of lower limbs when the stem shattered, unfortunately. 3-year-old regrowth can be seen here, and note that there are many competing upright shoots coming off from that one of the main limbs here. There's no dominance particularly shown by the regrowth over that period of time. So there isn't one main leader developing near the stem by any means. There's a lot of ones of very similar height. It'll be interesting to see what form eventually develops in this shattered sycamore tree, if it persists for another decade or so without further decaying and collapsing. So if you look at actual trees, few match up to this proposed law of the minimum lever arm. It's also just poor theory, as it only considers static loading, not dynamic loading. What would be best would be for scientists like Dr. Mullier to investigate regrowth patterns in shattered trees and to determine species-specific patterns of regrowth and whether there are particular patterns that are more stable in the long term than others. In my view, conjecture should not be taught as a truth, and this concept is easily disproved by examining multiple specimens. Unfortunately, a lot of Klaus Mattok's written work from the 1980s and 1990s is much like this, not based on experiments, suggestions or conjecture that often later prove to be wrong. Thanks for listening to my hot take. Talk again soon.